Well, dear colleagues, I'm very happy to talk to you today about Rudolf Mosse's art collection in the light of provenance research. And I think it will fit perfectly to the three talks of this afternoon as another example of bourgeois art collecting. And you will see with many similarities, but also with many differences. So here we go. In March 2017, and Milena already mentioned that, in March 2017, Rudolf Mosse's heirs, together with Freie Universität Berlin, founded the Mosse Art Research Initiative, in short, MARI. This opened a new chapter in research of cultural objects confiscated or otherwise lost due to persecution during the Nazi regime. For the first time, descendants of the victims of racial persecution were ready to cooperate with German institutions. The initiative was pioneered in particular by two individuals, Isabel Pfeiffer-Pönsken, then still General Secretary of the Kulturstiftung der Länder, today Minister for Culture and Science in North Rhine-Westphalia, and Hermann Patzinger, President of Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz. Since then, I have been directing the team of the Mosse Art Research Initiative, which, due to its research successes, I hope I can say this, has now entered its second funding phase. MARI is innovative in many ways and has great relevance in terms of cultural policy. The sides that are usually diametrically opposed to one another in the debate over restitution, descendants making claims and institutions confronted with these claims, here work together in a highly transparent network to create important impulses for future knowledge generation in the realm of context of confiscation under the Nazi regime, thus providing a sustainable contribution to the culture of memory in Germany. Whoa. So here comes the first problem. I don't know how to move my presentation. Maybe this way. Yes, okay. Here I show you our website, the MARI portal, where you can see all our research results of provenance research and context research. And I would like to encourage you to visit the website to learn more about our project, our cooperation partners, about Rudolf Mosse's family, his art collection, and all the sources we were able to find so far. In my talk today, I can just briefly describe what MARI is about. MARI's focus is placed on the former art collection of Rudolf Mosse. Concretely speaking, at issue is the reconstruction of the collection and the whereabouts of individual works after the liquidation of the collection by the Nazi regime. At the time, the project also seeks to gain insight into the strategies of the so-called Gleichschaltung, consolidation, after the Nazi came to power in 1933, as well as the persecution situation that the Mosse family was subjected to and their individual paths of immigration. However, our project is not solely concerned with the personal fate of the family and their loss of assets during the Third Reich. Rather, our questions reach back into the 19th century and also concern the art and cultural historical implications, the formation of the collection and its significance at the time, as well as Rudolf Mosse's socialization in collector and art circles. Provenance research in particular offers profound insights into this. Long before current provenance research focused on political contexts of injustice in the relocation of cultural property, it was considered a fundamental component in establishing the subject matter of our field of research. As early as at the first Congress of Art History in Vienna in 1873, the the birth of the subject as an academic discipline, information on the provenance was declared to be an indispensable part of the systematic and standardized documentation of artworks. The early importance of provenance information shows that the biographical data of an artwork should consider it on an equal footing with its object data, such as technique, material, and measurements. The two, the ephemeral and the intrinsic data, have a correlative relationship. Without one, a work of art cannot be fully inferred by the other, according to the scientific premise. The provenance of an artwork is part of its identity. Only in the provenance does the work visibly step out of the sphere of art creation and can be located in world events. Provenance documents the complex connections and interrelations between art, society, and history. And before I go into more detail about our provenance research results and draw conclusions about Mosse's art collection and the spirit of bourgeois art collecting, I would first like to introduce you to the collector himself and his family. So who was Rudolf Mosse? As one of the most influential figures of the economic elite in late 19th century, the name of the Jewish German publisher Rudolf Mosse is closely linked to the history of the former German empire capital. In 1861, Rudolf Mosse moved to Berlin from his hometown of Grätz in the Prussian province of Posen at age 18. Several years later, founding the company Annoncenexpedition Rudolf Mosse. The name of the company referred to the idea of leasing pages in newspapers to place advertisements and thus bring the manufacturers directly in contact with the customers. During the boom years of the late 19th century and the industrialization of printing, the Mosse business rapidly became a success model. In the shortest time, Mosse became the most important advertiser in Germany. Just 5 years later, he had over 250 branch offices in Germany and abroad. The next step in his career took Rudolf Mosse from advertising to publishing. 1903, he moved into his new building, located at the corner of Jerusalemer and Schützenstraße in the midst of the developing newspaper district in Berlin. Mosse's publishing house was outfitted with the latest technology and offered a modern, worker-friendly environment, as was proudly announced in postcards. Mosse Verlag published daily newspapers, popular magazines, and nearly 130 specialist journals, along with exhibition catalogs, art publications, and much more. Berliner Tageblatt, which had been published by Mosse since 1871, became the journalistic pride of the company and the leading Berlin newspaper. As editor-in-chief, Theodor Wolff made a key contribution to the heyday of the paper in the 1910s and 1920s. Wolff gave the newspaper a bourgeois liberal line, and he succeeded in bringing the elite of German journalism and prominent authors and scholars to write for the newspaper, including the German-born physicist Albert Einstein, the German-Jewish journalist Kurt Tucholsky, the journalist Egon Erwin Kisch from Czechoslovakia, the German author Erich Kästner, and the publisher Peter Suhrkamp. In this way, Berliner Tageblatt became the voice of an entire era and sometimes was even called the German Times. The corner design of the publishing house headquarters in an Art Nouveau style was dominated by a huge relief with a female nude. Rudolf Mosse explained the depiction as an allegory of truth, since, as he put it, nothing but the naked truth gets reported in his newspapers. Having now become an affluent man, just a minute, where's my cursor? In 1874, he married Emilie Löwenstein, the daughter of a merchant family. Erna Felicia Rudolf Mosse's child from a different relationship was adopted by Emilie. In the early 1880s, Mosse had a neo-Baroque, majestic, three-story city residence erected on Leipziger Platz that was designed by the Berlin architects Gustav Ebe and Julius Bender, highly esteemed at the time. When he and his family moved into the Palais, he started to build up an art collection of paintings, sculptures, watercolors, and drawings, complemented by luxury furnishings, as well as antiques, antiquities, decorative arts, tapestries, East Asian porcelain, and Benin bronzes, and a rich library, including some rare editions. Besides the City Palais, Mosse also acquired other properties and land holdings in and around Berlin, including the castle Schenkendorf, where the family spent their summer months and which Mosse made into one of the most important sites for his social and cultural circles to congregate. In Schenkendorf were also placed parts of Mosse's art collection, especially the items from non-European cultures. As a typical representative of Berlin's business elite, Rudolf was involved in charity work together with Emilie. They supported health and social welfare programs and promoted mass education. They donated scholarships and funded various associations, ensured the social security of their employees, and financed the erection of hospitals and orphanages, like the Mossische Erziehungsanstalt für Knaben und Mädchen that was founded in Berlin-Wilmersdorf in 1885, which I show you here at the slide. Mosse's era ended with the fall of the German Empire. After German defeat in the First World War and the establishment of the Republic, which was called into existence on November 9, 1918, the left-wing extremists radicalized and initiated in the early days of 1919 the Spartacist uprising. The revolutionaries occupied the printing presses of the social democratic newspapers, and condition approaching civil war took hold. Mosse's publishing house was also occupied by the rebels. The building, especially the corner decoration, was seriously damaged by gunfire. In January 1919, the Council of the People's Deputies crushed the uprising. Just a few months later, the Weimar Constitution took effect and the monarchy was replaced with a parliamentary democracy. A short while later, in September 1920, Mosse died of heart failure at his country estate Rittergut Schenkendorf at age 76. 4 years later, he was followed by his wife Emilie. Her adopted daughter, Felicia, inherited the entire Mosse estate. Her husband, Hans Lachmann Mosse, whom she had married in 1909, took over the publishing business. Between 1921 and 1923, he had the headquarters completely redesigned by the architect Erich Mendelsohn. The new building, in its modern, streamlined style, announced the new era on the outside, without forgetting the founder whose name it continued to bear. In this spirit, Felicia and Hans Lachmann Mosse also kept Mosse Palais on Leipziger Platz with its art collection open to the interested public, and large receptions continued to be held here. Meanwhile, the Lachmann-Mosse couple remained with their three children, Rudolf, Hilde, and George, in their own villa on Maßenstraße in Berlin-Tiergarten, and also resided at Mosse's country estate Rittergut Schenkendorf. Just after 1933, the Nazis liquidated the corporate empire that was already struggling financially due to the Great Depression, and drove the Lachmann-Mosse family into exile. The possessions left in Berlin by the Mosses, their real estate, as well as Mosse's art collection and their own, were declared ownerless and placed under a trusteeship assigned with their liquidation. In May 1934, the collection was The collection objects and furnishings at the Mosse Palais were sold by the auction house Rudolf Lepke in Berlin. A week later, an additional auction of artworks and furnishings was held by the Berlin Auction House Union at Felicia and Hans Lachmann Mosse's villa on Marsenstraße. After the end of the Second World War, Felicia Lachmann Mosse made claims in the context of the reparation and compensation laws for her lost estate. At the end of 1945, Berlin court confirmed her loss of control over her private estate as of April 1933. However, she was forced to withdraw her applications for compensation for the collections auctioned off in 1934. Due to a lack of evidence. The compensation case also did not account for the real estate owned by the Mosse family that were located in the newly founded GDR and thus outside the jurisdiction of the new West German laws. These included not only Mosse Palais on Leipziger Platz, but also Rittergut Schenkendorf. Only after German reunification did the heirs of Felicia and Hans Lachmann Mosse receive their real estate back in the early 1990s on the basis of the newly released Act on the Settlement of Open Property Issues under recognition of losses related to Nazi persecution. 2 decades later, the Mosse Foundation began to search for artworks from the former Rudolf Mosse collection and established the Mosse Art Restitution Project, focused on locating the artworks, but quickly reached their limits because little was known about the art collection. And this is where Mari stepped in. Traces of the Mosse family and their business are still visible in Berlin today. The newspaper publisher and philanthropist Rudolf Mosse has thus not been forgotten, but hardly anyone knows Rudolf Mosse as an art collector. The low level of interest that he has received in this capacity may be due to the fact that the core of his collection, the paintings, sculptures, watercolors, and drawings, is difficult to classify into the common art historical patterns. Although his collection was described as modern in contemporary newspaper articles, Rudolf Mosse was definitely not a pioneer of the aesthetic avant-garde, such as, for example, 2 of his contemporaries in Berlin, the merchant Eduard Arnold or the banker Hugo Simon. Thus, in his contribution to the 2012 anthology Aufbruch in die Moderne, literary and culture scholar Joost Hermann endeavored to do justice to Mosse's collection nonetheless, describing it as relevant modern in comparison with the historicism officially favored by the Emperor Wilhelm II. And this brings me to the essence of my presentation. What information can the Mosse Art Research Initiative contribute to a reassessment of the collection? Joost Hermann had already recognized that Mosse's art collection consists mainly of works from the second half of the 19th century. This assessment can still be confirmed. However, Hermann was based on only 2 sources: a selection of top works from the collection, also from the Rudolf Mosse collection, which Mosse's son-in-law Hans Lachmann Mosse had published in 1932, and the catalogue of the 1934 Nazi auction at the Rudolf Lepke auction house in Berlin, which, as explained in the preface, also offered only masterpieces and added works from the collections of other family members or branches. Unfortunately, an inventory of the complete Mosse collection is still missing today, but the Mosse Art Research Initiative was able to locate a total of 6 collection catalogs from the years between 1900 and 1921, which allow a far more differentiated judgment of the collection. Thus, it becomes apparent that Mosse, in addition to the works already mentioned by Joost Hermann, of such recognized masters as Adolf von Menzel, Wilhelm Leibl, Franz von Lehmbach, Karl Blechen, Hans Thoma, and Anselm Feuerbach, collected above all works by far less well-known artists, such as Eduard Grützner, Hans Fechner, Eugen van Blaas, Paul Meyerheim, Max Clarenbach, Eduard von Gebhardt, and many more. Their works outweighed, oh no, I think, no, okay, sorry, I was too fast with my presentation. Their works outweighed the collection, and in this, Rudolf Mosse's intention becomes clearer. At the time, he was considered the third richest man in Berlin and would have been able to afford a collection consisting exclusively of masterpieces. However, his preference for artists who were only regionally known at the time shows his lack of interest in purely art historical issues. Instead, the socio-political relevance of the artworks came to the fore. German realism developed in parallel with the rise of the bourgeoisie and is referred to as democratic art. The motives were generally understandable and did not presuppose any historical knowledge. The Mosse couple particularly appreciated popular genre scenes, portraits of well-known personalities of the time, and landscapes from the surrounding area. Beyond the academic norm and the classical ideal, German realism shows the realities of life at that time, but in an idealized form. Obviously, Mosse wanted his collection to pay homage rather to the art itself, but to the period that allowed him his financial and social ascent. The fact that Mosse did not build his collection according to connoisseurship principles is also shown by his acquisition strategies. This kind of information is seldom used in art historical considerations, but in provenance research, it is a focus of attention and can also provide important insights for our topic today. Rudolf Mosse dispensed with the advice of museum experts, as was actually typical of Berlin patronage. Wilhelm Bode, general director of the Berlin State Museums, had established this tradition, while focusing his circle of patrons on German, Dutch, and Italian art since the Renaissance. Hugo von Tschudi, director of the National Gallery, encouraged the formation of avant-garde art collections. Mosse, who was not attracted by either extreme, had his art collection managed by two art critics from his publishing house, Fritz Stahl and Adolf Donath. Art criticism became increasingly important at the beginning of the 20th century. It bridged the gap between the growing diversity of the contemporary art scene and the bourgeois public. Stahl and Donath were recognized authorities at the time. They observed the current gallery and exhibition scene and made Mosse purchase proposals according to his wishes. Through their newspaper reports, we learn that Mosse preferred to consult the catalogs of the major annual exhibitions in Berlin and Munich, which were published by his own publishing house. This is where he acquired most of the works for his art collection, and not individually, but rather in groups. For example, I think this is not readable for you, but yeah, it's not so important. For example, Donath reports in an article about the International Munich exhibition at the Glaspalast in 1888 that Rudolf Mosse acquired no fewer than 20 works to establish a modern private gallery. Further large-scale acquisitions followed in the next years. his acquisition of the complete library of the Berlin literary scholar Erich Schmidt, with a total of 10,000 volumes of German literature in 1913, was also of this kind. Rudolf Mosse and his wife Emilie were happy to fill in the gaps between the foundation stones of the collection, thus laid, by purchasing directly from the artists with whom they both maintain close contacts. Not seldom, this was also done for reasons of social welfare, in order to provide an income for contemporary artists. The Landesarchiv in Berlin has preserved extensive correspondences from the Mosses that provides information about this. In this respect, even after this section, it can be concluded that Mosse's art collection was created more as a mirror of his social identity, or his own understanding of his social identity. And now back to the artworks. To the part of German artists, Mosse added a few works of contemporary Swedish, Dutch, Belgian, Italian, Spanish, and Swiss artists who also followed the art movement of realism. In this way, the German part of Mosse's collection was embedded in the European art scene, quite in the spirit of the pan-europäische Völkerverständigung, which is maybe pan-European understanding. I don't know, but I couldn't find a more appropriate translation. In the spirit of pan-europäische Völkerverständigung, which was still very much in its infancy at the time, but corresponded with the direction of the Berliner Tageblatt. In this respect, however, it is very surprising that not a single work by a French artist was purchased by Mosse for his collection. We can find an explanation for this if we look at the frieze on his city palais. In 1883, Rudolf Mosse commissioned the Berlin sculptor Max Klein to create a monumental frieze visible from afar for the facade looking onto Leipziger Platz. The frieze has not yet been analyzed in detail. It was destroyed with the building during the Second World War. Today, only photos of it exists and, fortunately, a correspondence between Max Klein and Rudolf Mosse, in which the artist explains the individual scenes to his client. The 2-meter-high frieze with the title Die Erhebung des deutschen Geistes, the rise of German genius, shows the development of the German Empire in several stages. In the final scene, the chronology reads from left to right. In the final scene, the German eagle triumphs over the Gallic rooster. Mosse obviously wanted to set a monument to the victory of the German states in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71, and thus the long-awaited foundation of the German Empire. Rudolf Mosse's childhood was shaped by the March Revolution in 1848, when liberal bourgeois democratic circles called for the unification of the individual states of the German Confederation and the independence of the German nation as central goals. The struggle against restorative forces of the Allied ruling houses also inspired the emancipation movement in the Jewish population, which identified with the German nation despite the anti-Semitism dominant in the country. At that time, Mosse's father, who was involved in the revolution, had the family name Moses changed into Mosse. Rudolf Mosse's pride about the triumph of the German nation over France and the newly achieved independence of a state was the reason for the exclusion of works by French artists from his collection. This also explains once again why Mosse did not develop any interest in avant-garde art, which at the time was highly influenced by Impressionism, Pointillism, Symbolism, and the L'Art pour l'Art movement from France. While all of the above-mentioned points fit in with Wilhelm II's state conservative view of art, which did not merge solely with historicism, Mosse was nevertheless no admirer of the imperial house. On the contrary, as a typical representative of the economic bourgeoisie, he too fought against the disproportion between the economic achievements of his class and its political powerless position. The frieze at his Palais facade, showing the development of the German Empire, is interrupted by a figurative segmental pediment over the balcony niche on the top floor. The scrollwork cartouche placed at the center is emblazoned with the initials of Rudolf Mosse, RM. And I hope you can realize it at my slide. In this way, the owner of the residence inscribed himself right in the middle of German history. The affront inherent in this kind of self-representation becomes even clearer when one considers the location of the palace. Mosse's Palais, or Mosse Palais, facing Leipziger Platz, right next to the glamorous department store Wertheim, was part of cosmopolitan city life. The Kurzside on Vossstraße was right in the middle of the government district of the empire. The symbolic effect emanating from his palais negated the rank of the imperial court and at the same time challenged the constitution of a new social order in clear opposition to the conservative policies of Wilhelm II. There existed another key work in Mosse's art collection which testified to Mosse's self-confidence. In 1899, Mosse commissioned a mural from Anton von Werner for the family dining room in the first floor of his residence. The 5-meter-long and 2.5-meter-high painting with the title Das Gastmahl der Familie Mosse, the Mosse family banquet, shows the family members with friends seated at a richly set table against a landscape in the backdrop. Rudolf Mosse had 6 brothers and 5 sisters, most of whom lived in Berlin, but the focus of the painting is decidedly placed on his friends, on the friends of Rudolf Mosse, while the hosts sit modestly in the background and on the sidelines. Rudolf Mosse is wearing a white ruff and is placed left of the center, standing behind the table. Emilie is placed in the foreground on the right, with Felicia behind her. Due to the picture's compositional arrangement, the attention of the beholder is initially drawn to the upright male figure near the center with the raised chalice in his right hand. The person in question was the Council of Justice and writer Albert Träger, who at the time sat in the German Reichstag for the Deutsche Freisinnige Partei. Additional figures in the painting were almost members of that political party. For example, the well-known Berlin pathologue, I don't know how to spell it, pathologue Rudolf Virchow, sitting behind the table next to Mosse, with whom Mosse was close friends, as well as the lawyer Albert Haenel, left behind the table with a white beard and white ruff, and the journalist and philosopher Heinrich Rickert, with a black hat left next to Haenel. They all held important positions in the Deutsche Freisinnige Partei. In 1889, Mosse was also invited to accept a candidacy for the Reichstag. He declined, but not for ideological reasons. He remained loyal to the party's ethos throughout his life. The Deutsche Freisinnige Partei had a liberal left program. It promoted increasing the role of parliament in the constitutional monarchy, securing press freedom and establishing equality among all religions, including Judaism. The painting shows Mosse and his friends in a form of representation, otherwise reserved for the aristocracy, thus questioning the primacy of the reactionary power elite of the empire. In addition, the scene of the table gathering is placed in the Dutch 17th century, a heyday of art and scholarship, an era of religious freedom and bourgeois prosperity. It seems that Mosse had the mural painted as a rejection of the emperor that was clearly understood at the time. Emperor Wilhelm II, who began rule in 1888, proved increasingly to be a stubborn enemy of liberalism in all its aspects. It must have been a provocation of a special kind that Mosse had the mural painted by no other than Anton van Werner, the so-called court painter of Wilhelm II. When the large painting was installed in the dining room, Mosse began to think about opening his collection to the public, which would fulfill the goal of his motivation as a collector. After all, a message can only be successfully sent out if as many people as possible become aware of it. We can only infer Mosse's intention in this respect through the new source findings of the Mosse Art Research Initiative. In his first collection catalogue, published in 1900, not all the works he collected so far are registered, but only the ones on display in his residence. Also, the works are not listed in an alphabetical order of the artists, but according to the place of their display, which means they appear under the header of the respective room on the 3 floors. Both a clear indication that the small catalogue was meant to be a guide for the visitors through the collection. And we can also see from the catalogue that it was intended rather for the general bourgeoisie, but not for art connoisseurs, as only sparse data was noted, the artist's surname and the title of the work. Nothing more, no dating, no information about material, technique, inscriptions, or anything else. A total of 188 works are listed in the 1900 catalogue, a respectable collection, and yet Mosse hesitated to open it. What was the reason? While the works of art were spread throughout all the rooms of the Mosse Palais and already occupied the private area, there was only one work in the sculpture hall, the bronze group of a philosopher by an unnamed artist. However, Mosse considered the creation of a collection of monumental sculptures for which the hall was intended in its dimensions to be a central part of his planning or of his collection. Probably here, too, we must assume direct competition with the emperor, who was known for promoting contemporary monumental sculpture, while other private collectors paid little attention to it, simply because of the difficulty of housing it. With his special intention, Mosse turned to the Berlin sculptor Walter Schott in 1901 and commissioned an Art Nouveau fountain with 3 dancing girls for installation in his courtyard garden directly in front of the sculpture hall. This fountain would be the first work his visitors would see. Schott, like Anton van Werner, was considered one of the emperor's court artists and had created a monument for his Siegesallee, Victory Avenue in Berlin's Central Park, Tiergarten, which opened in 1898. By commissioning the artist, Mosse showed everyone who would see the work in the future in his courtyard, what the emperor can do, so can I. To Mosse's great disappointment, as can be read in correspondences between him and the artist, the completion of the fountain dragged on for years. Even on his 65th birthday in 1908, the fountain had not yet been completed. Mosse had postponed the opening of his art collection to that year, as can be seen from the bibliophilic collection catalogue published for the occasion, which again was intended to serve as a guide through the Mosse Palais for his guests. In the meantime, Mosse had added 9 works to his collection of monumental sculptures. But it was not until 1909 that Schott delivered the fountain to Mosse. Despite his anger at the renewed delay, Mosse was very pleased with the result and paid Schott far more than the agreed price. In the same year of the installation of the fountain, the opening of the art collection took place by appointment or as part of charitable events. Interested visitors could tour the Mosse Palais for a fee of between 2 and 5 marks. The proceeds were again donated to charity projects. Fritz Stahl, Adolf Donath, and other art critics of the time, such as Max Osborn, praised Mosse effusively and called his collection the Mosse Gallery or even Mosseum. Mosse's actual mission, however, had been outlived. His idea to promote art of his time, not as a purpose in or of itself, but linked to the concrete goals of social reform, and thus strengthens the inner cohesion of the population against the politics of restoration under Emperor Wilhelm II, was no longer achievable in Berlin with a collection like that of Rudolf Mosse. The imperial capital had long since been on its way to becoming a modern metropolis. Only 5 years after the opening of his collection, the First World War broke out. Mosse still published a collecting catalogue in 1915, documenting the final state of his collection, after which he made no more acquisitions. Instead, Hans Lachmann Mosse added several works to his father's-in-law collection in the 1920s. However, he had a very different understanding of art, and so Rudolf Mosse's collection was increasingly diluted in its original idea. Only a few years later, the collection was completely torn apart by the Nazi auction in 1934 and fell into oblivion. Hans Frank, later Governor General of the occupied Polish territories, moved into the empty Mosse Palais and established his Academy for German Law here. He exchanged the Schott fountain for the marble sculpture of a young lion by August Gaul, which Mosse had acquired in 1904. Amazingly, the sculpture survived the destruction of World War II. This photograph with the sculpture in the courtyard of Mosse Palais was taken in May 1945. To the left of the lion is a grave of a soldier. The palais around has been destroyed down to its foundations. Hitler's Neue Reichskanzlei, towards which the lion seems to be looking, is also in ruins. Due in no small part to Mari's research findings, the lion now stands in Berlin's James Simon Gallery in the center of Berlin as a memorial witness to Rudolf Mosse's collecting activities and everything that happened after his death. Thank you for your attention.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Meike, for this extremely interesting keynote. So I would like to ask if there are some questions. We have now the Q&A session. So if you would like to ask the question, please go ahead. If there's, I have one question, but I don't want to. Is there? No, there's no question in Q&A section. So perhaps I will start. So well, this is very interesting how Mosse was creating his collection, and as you mentioned, he was not buying a single French painting or piece of art, and this is so different from what was at that time in Berlin, and how the bourgeoisie, especially of Jewish origin, was I would say even specialized in French modern art. And so there's this, I think Kamila was mentioning today, Weronika Grodziński and her work on bourgeoisie, or on those collectors, Berlin collectors, who are somehow trying to create their identity in contrary to the cultural Wilhelminian politic with this French art. And as if I remember well, Grodziński was calling this a subversive strategy. So on one side, they were buying French art and donating it to Berlin's museums, but in a way which was completely different from the supported German art. So showing, yes, we are here, we are citizens. However, we support different art, French art, which was more associated with a liberal French Republican state, as with Wilhelminian monarchy. I don't know, could you somehow also explain why then is this idea of those contraries, is it, you find it correct, or you could add something?
No, it's correct, yeah, but with Mosse, yeah, he had his own strategies, you know, and for example, what I not mentioned in my talk, during my talk, is that some of the contemporaries of Rudolf Mosse, for example, Eduard Arnold, who he knew very well, of course, and who also collected German art from the second half of the 19th century, but then turned to modern art and to purchase French Impressionism and also German Expressionism, because he followed the advice of Hugo von Tschudi, for example. Was really a different art collector than Rudolf Mosse. And so, yes, as I explained during my talk, I think it is, and you know, I will put, or I will emphasize this, this was only able to conclude because we were able to reconstruct the collection. Otherwise, no one could say that there is no French work in the collection, you understand? So, but yeah, that shows very clearly that Rudolf Mosse didn't collect art because he wanted to promote or support the development of art, or the development of modern art, and collect for the art itself, but it was, for him, an art collection was a part of his social identity, of course, but it depended on his political worldview, I would say, and not. It was not dependent on art theory, or art expertise, or whatever.
Okay, thank you. And there's one question from Thomas Stammers. Really wonderful paper, thank you. Could you say more about Mosse's interest in non-European art? The range of cultures and civilizations represented in the collections is striking. How do we make sense of this global vision? Am I right in thinking that these Asian collections were largely kept in Schenkendorf? What else do we know about how he used this space?
Yeah. yeah, they're very important question with many aspects. First of all, the Mari team was able to find evidence that, for example, the East Asian porcelain was purchased by Hans Lachmann Mosse and not by Rudolf Mosse, and was located in Rittergut Schenkendorf, as well as the Benin bronzes, for example. But we know from Rudolf Mosse that he supported archaeology or the Museum of Archaeology in Berlin, and with financial support, and this was not because I think this belongs more to his charitable work than to his art collection, you know. And then he received, for example, donations from museum directors or artists or scholars, because he supported them. But these were not purchased by him himself on the basis of his original idea. Mm-hmm. That is very important to distinguish, and that is why today I only referred to the collection of paintings, sculptures, and yes, the most German or European part of the collection.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a question from Wojka Cieślińska-Lobkowicz. Were in Mosse's collection German Jewish artists or works on the Jewish subjects?
Please repeat the question. I didn't get it.
Were in Mosse's collection German Jewish artists or works on the Jewish subjects?
Let me think. Not many. Not many, and I know there's. I don't think so. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there is no. Okay, is there any other question from the audience or from the? Not. Okay. Well. Okay, so those two, there's one question, 1 second, I wanted to ask you. And how many weeks you've already located?
How many weeks?
I made a mistake. How many works have you already located?
Located, okay, sorry.
Okay, I should have looked into my files before this talk. I think I don't know exactly, but we have located many works of art. And what I can say for sure is that until today, 11 restitution took place on the basis of the Mosse art research results, and many are on negotiation. And of course, some restitution, for example, especially with when the artworks ended up in private collection, these applications or claims were refused, I think, in 5 times. And yes, that's it. But we were able to find many traces, and we were able to took up research on every single artwork that we could identify or reconstruct for the Mosse art collection so far. Yes, and 11 restitutions. I think that's a lot for 3 years.
Okay, so it definitely shows how important the Provenienzforschung is, which is looking probably differently in Germany, I suppose, than, for example, in Poland. And is it like the what kind of response do you find if you are approaching institutions, inquiring if those pieces of art were asking those institutions, museums, if those pieces of art were belonging to, suggesting that they were belonging, for example, to Mosse? Is it like, yes, is there, how should I call it? Is there an openness or kind of neglecting and
it differs a lot, you know, and it depends. I think it depends on how, and it depends if it's a state museum or a private museum or a small museum, and yes, it really differs. Some of the state museums, of course, they are very interested in our research, and most of them in Germany cooperate with our Mosse Art Research Initiative. And of course, if we get into contact and have a question about a piece of art, or suggest that there is another work from the former Mosse collection, they help us, and they are really open-minded to our research. But sometimes it is very, very difficult, and we are faced with arguments that no, this is a copy of the work, this is not the one you were looking for, and so on, of course. And I have to say that, for example, the Polish Museum refused any claim of the Mosse heirs. So it depends also, or as well, on the policy, the restitution policy of the different countries, of course.
So there are differences in this restitution politics, I would say. And it's different in Germany and Poland also. Okay, so
please let me explain this. This is very important for the Mosse Art Research Initiative, and I didn't mention it because the Mosse Art Research Initiative is not a restitution project, you know. We are not involved in this restitution negotiations, and this is really important for our research, because otherwise, it would be too difficult to communicate together with the heirs and the museums and the private holders, because then there are two different interests in
too big tension,
you know. And that is why, for me, I'm pretty happy if I know where the works are, and the rest is the work of the lawyers. So, yeah.
Good approach, I think. So if I think there are no more questions, but it was great. It was fantastic paper, Meike. We really I enjoyed it a lot. I think the audience as well. So it was really, really interesting, and we gonna think of the maybe future promotion of the book. As we said, the book about Breslau and Stettin and Königsberg. So we stay definitely in touch, and thank you very much. So that was all for today.